Good morning. This is David Odran, Executive Director of SISO, welcoming you to SISO's first online town hall. I'd like to welcome the four panelists. They are SISO's officers, in fact, newly installed as of yesterday. Just going to let them introduce themselves first. Douglas Emsley.
Hi, I'm Doug Emsley, CEO of Tarsus and now Chair of SISO.
And Hervé.
Hello, Hervé Setki. I'm with Reed Exhibitions, and I'm the Vice Chair of SISO as of yesterday.
Cassandra.
I am Cassandra Farrington. I am the co-founder and chairman of the board of MJ BizCon. And as of yesterday, I am the secretary and treasurer for SISO.
And Greg.
Good morning. I am Greg Topalian. I'm the president and CEO of Marion Events here in North America and the immediate past chair.
Great. Welcome. Thank you all for being here. The first question I'm gonna start with Doug and ask you all to answer it because it's just to give people a feeling. Are you having to cancel versus postpone and reschedule most of your affected shows? What's the difference between the two, Doug?
Yeah, well, I mean, for most people on the webinar today, I suspect this has been a process that's been going on for probably the last month. For us, we've got a big portfolio of shows all around the world, and in China, this started for us on January the 12th. And to date, even though this is our quietest half of the year, we've postponed 46 events, and those are events that actually we have rescheduled for basically September through in December. And so far we've only cancelled one show, and that was in China. So it's been a big issue for us in terms of moving and finding capacity, but the team have done a great job and done that for us.
Hervé?
So just to add to Doug's comments, from my perspective, one of the things that's really interesting is actually the calls that we are all getting from exhibitors, large and small. And for every call that you get that basically suggests that we postpone or cancel, you get some that say, under no circumstance should you cancel the show. And recognizing that 80+% of our customers are small customers and they really need this platform, we're really trying not to cancel as many shows as possible. And so most of our shows are postponed. I'd refer to a study that I looked at this morning from AMR. And in that study, they had something like 12 or 1,300 shows. No, more than that, 1,500 total shows that they looked at between postponed and canceled. And about 20% of them were canceled. So that gives us a good sense of kind of how the industry is doing.
Great. Cassandra?
For us, it's a moving target. We have a much smaller portfolio than the other folks that are on the call here. In a couple of cases, for some of our smaller, more conference type events, we have decided not to host those. Other ones that we are moving out of the first quarter and second quarter, but we're just continuing to monitor the situation and secure space where we can and see how things develop.
And Greg?
Yeah, it's same for us. No cancels yet. Everything is about moving. And I know one of the questions is, when do you move them to our best and later, right? Just to be on the outer edge of safety. And we've had pretty good luck so far. So knock on wood, we're Q3, Q4 going to be very busy.
I think everybody's going to be very busy in the second half. My own company, we've had to cancel. We've had 3 shows that we've lost this month, including, of course, the CISO CEO Summit that was supposed to open yesterday. So those of you that would have been joining us in Dallas, we look forward to seeing you next year. Doug, you mentioned that you've been able to postpone or reschedule the vast majority of the events. What challenges is that really creating for your teams in consolidating basically a year's worth of events into the second half of the year?
Well, I think that it's on a number of fronts. First of all, it's actually getting the slots, and I mean, we reckon there's about 140% capacity going into the final 4 months of the year. So the first thing is actually finding the slots. I think that the next challenges that are going to come are going to be actually the production of those shows, because actually with the general contractors, finding the labor and the equipment is going to be a material challenge. And then it's the unknown in terms of actually what date's going to be safe to actually resume, and are we going to have to go through and do this all again? So those are the sort of challenges that we're dealing on a daily basis.
Wow. Greg, how are you dealing with requests for refunds from events that you've had to cancel or postpone? GSMA just announced their policy for refunds to exhibitors of the canceled 2020 Mobile World Congress, and they're creating significant incentives for exhibitors that are willing to roll over part of their payments to the 2021 show. What types of incentives are you offering?
Yeah, so that one's so every situation is a little bit different, right? So if the refunds are, more the attendee side, or are they more the exhibitor side? I think it all depends on how far out the event is as well. So it's difficult. We are doing incentives, but in general, we're trying to just be upfront and fair, right? And let people know, because what I've seen is there's a little bit more of a panic. We don't know what and quite honestly, there are some organizations that are really may not be for them, right? They're having to deal with that. So I think the first thing is communicate clearly about this is what you can do, right? So on the most recently postponed event, which happened to be of a consumer variety, we basically came out and said, option one, your ticket is good for the rescheduled event. Option two, if you want to wait until next year, you can have that ticket next year. Option three, if you want a refund, you can get a refund, right? These are your three options. We then are looking at, we'd obviously much rather they stay in with us. So we did come up with some ways to sort of sweeten the opportunity for them to stay in. And very happy to say on that event, we only had about 15% of the customers say, I want my money back, right? So it all depends on the situation, but I think the biggest thing you can do is take a position, make it fairly clear, and then hopefully do your best to hang on to them as customers.
Anybody else got feedback on that? And actually, one addition to that question that came in is, are you changing your terms? Are you offering additional guarantees to exhibitors for any rescheduled events that to keep them in?
Certainly not in a universal way. It's not like we've completely altered our terms and conditions, but we are being flexible with potential exhibitors that are asking the question of what if this gets pushed back. So, in some cases we are coming up with specific language that gives them a little more of what I'd consider like a parachute, just to give them comfort, but it's not something that is now just the new terms and conditions.
Anybody else doing anything different?
In our case, while we do have a smaller show portfolio, as I mentioned, than some of the other folks on the call, we do have a significant addition to our business that is editorial based and content based. And so we are doing what we can to move sponsors and exhibitors into other ways to stay in touch with their audiences. And I know that there are a lot of people who are looking at other forms of staying in touch with their audiences and keeping their communities together while they cannot do live events. So going down some of those roads and moving some of those sponsor dollars and exhibit dollars and attendee dollars to those other activities is potentially an option.
Doug, what's been your experience with venues and hotels in canceling or postponing your events?
I think in general that the experience has been positive. I think most people have been practical, the long-term partners, and actually everybody is going through the same experience. That being said, that there are one or two exceptions, and I would basically encourage anybody out there who is having a current problem actually to get in touch with SISO, because right at this moment in time, we are lobbying in Washington with the major hotel groups, because they're looking to get part of the stimulus package. And I think that it's, on one side, they can't be arguing to get some money from government, while at the same time playing hardball with us as the customers and trying to enforce cancellation charges. So I think if anybody could come back to the SISO team and give us that information, it'd be really helpful in our lobbying in Washington.
Yes, and that should be expanded on a little bit. SISO is an association board member of the U.S. Travel Association, along with many others in the industry. And so we work with them. We don't have direct lobbying advocacy feet on the ground in D.C. We work with the U.S. Travel Association. We work with the Meetings Being Business Coalition, which we're part of. We work with the Events Industry Council, which we're part of. As well as internationally, the Joint Meetings Industry Council as well. So those are ways that we have made sure that SISO is represented in most of these discussions as we go forward in all areas. The rest of you, Cassandra, your experience, you haven't had to postpone or cancel as many, but any issues?
Yeah, no, it's as Doug said, it's a mixed bag. Some have been very accommodating and, been in we're all in this together and very much focused on preserving their relationship with us as an organization for a long-term customer relationship. Other places are fighting for their own survival and are treating us accordingly. So, we're just working through those issues as they come up and seeing what we can get and doing what we can to move that.
I'm assuming that at the moment, obviously we're through March now, but the March, April events have not been as hard to reschedule or postpone because of the travel bans, the meeting bans, everything's been in place. But of course, when you get into May and June events, we all know those are going to be challenged. But are the hotels and venues working with you yet? Because there are technically no bans in place in most cases.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody?
Yeah, David, this is Greg. So that is definitely what we're seeing. So I'll start on a positive. Most have been enormously partnering and accommodating and fabulous partners, right? And I could give you examples, but there are some where in these moments you kind of look at and say, that's why we value that relationship. So,
yep.
To those folks, couldn't be more appreciative. Definitely finding there are pockets in terms of whether it's the hotel chain, and some are being less accommodating than others. They may have a name that starts with the letter M. So just saying. But definitely it's about timing as well. So we have some events that are in June and July that is now feeling less practical and going to be impacted. And we're now having to play this game of chicken of like, okay, so we need to get closer to this, before we're able to get some flexibility. That's not great, right? And, it's unfortunate. But as Doug said, I think getting in touch with you and making sure that we sort of have some solidarity around some of these negotiations could be helpful. But, the positives certainly outweigh the negatives.
So in our own instance, for example, we know we had to cancel a couple of shows and events that we'd hoped, they were the end of March and all the way through the second week of March, we thought we were going ahead with them. And so we kept a strong line until the bans were put in place and we had to change. Are you doing the same with your later shows, your May, your June, July events? Are you maintaining a strict cancellation policy with your own customers? Who wants to jump on that one?
Well, I'm happy to go in first and say, we're taking the view that this is going to carry on. So we've moved all our shows through the whole of the second quarter. And we don't really start our shows again until mid-August. So we're taking that view. And that has been one of the challenges with the hotels in terms of, there's not a specific ban at the moment. But actually, in working it through, I think that, you know, we're taking the view that actually Q2 is going to cancel. And, you know, our exhibitors are, you know, are being practical and happy to move as a result of that.
So for Doug, so if you've moved a show from May to August or from April to September, are you being more flexible in the cancellation terms for those customers that that may not want to move?
Well, it's quite interesting in that, I mean, I would say it's 90+% of all our customers are happy with the fact that we're moving, and it's the exception who's not and who is asking for refund. And, you know, we are being flexible where, you know, actually there's a proper case, but we do that on a case by case basis. But actually it's a lot fewer than you would think.
Good. Anybody else different?
You know, Hervé, you had mentioned.
I'll jump in on that one. Taking the same. Sorry.
Go ahead, Greg.
Right. Sorry. So similar to Doug on that one. The only other scenario right now is I think we are finding there are some folks where a corporate decision's been taken around just not doing it this year. So we're not necessarily a liberal position on, I want you to get the value for that, then do next year's show, right? I don't think there's a lot gained from just holding somebody's money, having them never get the benefit of our show. So I certainly would look at it as a time to be more flexible on that. And I apologize for stepping on you, Cassandra.
You're totally good. We're all in this together, Greg. You know, what occurred to me was something that Hervé said earlier about how many of the customers are saying, please don't cancel that show. Please don't cancel that show, because we have to remember that these events that we produce are huge economic drivers in our industries. And so I think many of the exhibitors and attendees are happy simply to have an opportunity to get that event in. In some cases, absolutely, you know, we're going to have to be flexible due to corporate restrictions or companies that are truly on the edge, and we're working to preserve those relationships where possible. But I think that everybody really understands the extraordinary nature of this situation and are willing to be as flexible as they can as well. Good.
Hervé, what's been your experience with your general contractors and your other contractors? Any specific examples?
Sure. So obviously the general contractors have been unfortunately hit really, really hard. I don't think they're all in the same boat, if you will. So we look at them and have separated them into different tiers, tier 1, 2, 3, depending on their scale. Less concerned about the tier 1 largest players, although they have also instituted significant furlough programs and so forth for the next few months. But some of our customers, many of our customers rely on tier 2 and even tier 3 providers that I think it'll be a risk as to whether they're even able to operate. Mm-hmm. What we've done across the board from a supplier perspective is really look at the resiliency of all of our suppliers. And one of the things that we've done is we've really looked at asking each one of our show teams to answer 4 questions. How difficult would it be to switch to another supplier or insource that particular function? And it's really, you have 3 answers: easily, moderately, or significantly difficult. Second question is if the supplier is not able to perform the service or deliver the product, what percentage of our customers would be impacted? And again, 3 answers: less than 5%, less than 10%, or more than 10%. The third question is, what percentage of our suppliers' revenue do we, either at an event level or at a company level, contribute? And we look at low is 5%, medium is 5 to 10%, and high is over 10%. And the final question is, if the supplier is not able to perform the function, what is the impact to our business? Again, high, medium, low. And if an answer to any one of the 4 questions is high, is number 3, we call them a critical supplier. And then we have different methods that we use to really better understand what we do in that case. Do we insource? Do we look at different terms? Do we find other suppliers, et cetera?
Anybody else got any different feelings with the contractors at the moment? Good. Insurance claims. Who do I want to throw this? Doug, I know you haven't had to cancel too many, but who's had to cancel and make a claim on the insurance side so far?
You have.
Yeah, I think you're the one, Dave.
Well, I actually have two in process right now: the SISO CEO Summit and our New England Food Show. And I actually was on the phone with the forensic accountants this morning early with who've been assigned. I can tell you that in both those cases, we had cancellation insurance through SISO's Preferred, Butene and Risk Lloyd's package, and we had the communicable disease coverage in place from last year. In both of those cases, we waited until there were bans in place before we canceled the events, and we made claims right from the beginning. And we were informed on Friday that the insurance companies had recognized those claims as valid, and they've assigned a forensic accounting firm, which is their normal process, to actually define and verify the value of the claim, which I'm told by the insurance folks that that's the normal process, and at that point, it's not a matter of if they'll pay, it's a matter of what they'll pay. From that perspective onwards. So that's on the good news side. We've also heard of folks that don't have the communicable disease coverage in place. And we've heard of people that are trying to use business interruption insurance in different categories, different areas of the world for their businesses. Are any of you seeing any other positions right now? And what are you doing about insurance for the future? I know some of you, obviously, the larger companies typically self-insure in these sorts of scenarios. But for those of you that are getting coverage, what are you looking at? I just signed SISO's coverage for the 2021 events. And obviously, the communicable disease coverage went up significantly by a factor of 10, I think, in terms of cost. And it excludes the coronavirus, COVID-19, as it does SARS and MERS and anything else that's been around before. What else are you all seeing?
Well, I mean, I'm happy to jump in, David, and say that, I mean, in terms of our policies, you know, we don't have coverage for communicable diseases. But I mean, the interesting development really at the moment is actually whether there is an override because of basically the government shutdown, and whether that overrides the exclusion, and that's a sort of live debate for us, because I mean most insurance policies go back to Lloyd's of London, and they've been looking at it, and my understanding is that their legal advice wasn't definitive, that actually it didn't kick in. So we're going through a sort of legal process at the moment of seeing whether actually we do have an insurance claim under that angle. So I mean, I don't think it's black and white at the moment. So that's a positive, because it was specifically excluded for us, so we didn't think we had it, but there's a chance that we might have it.
Okay. Who else has got some experience on this side? Hervé, I'm assuming Reed self-insures?
Yeah, from our insurance, you know, from my understanding, insurance-wise, this is largely not an insurable area. The insurance typically works for one-off events, so big events like the Olympics or small independent events are typically insured, but companies that have many events are typically not insured. But that obviously is our case, and I'm not sure about others.
It was certainly my Messe Frankfurt days. Messe Frankfurt always basically self-insured for all of their hundreds plus events each year. Cassandra, Andre, you're on the smaller scale?
Yeah, we indeed. We have not actually canceled any events yet. So nothing, well, there's one that we've canceled that that was a very small event that we are, sort of working through right now, and just really in the beginning stages. We did make the initial moves to cancel the event before the ban was in place. It's a New York City event, and we could see the writing on the wall, and we just did not want to continue pouring money into promoting and producing that event, knowing what was coming. And so we're working through those elements and don't have clear answers yet. It's still fairly early days.
Good. Greg, anything?
No, nothing additional. I think the guys covered it well.
Good. Okay, let's switch on to online virtual events. Greg, do you want to kick this off on what you're doing with online virtual delivery?
Yeah. So, and I know Liz Irving is listening in here. So, hi, Liz. Thanks for all your efforts on this front. We are trying and experimenting on a number of things. So, in places where, as Cassandra said, where we have a media business. So, within like our fire and rescue business, we have a robust magazine and digital online business. So, in places like that, actually creating topic-centric webinars that are sponsored is generating good money, is actually creating a stickiness, right? So we're seeing live delegates of over 1,000, where we, literally potentially 10 times as many people as we might have otherwise. So we're seeing our greatest strength where there are heavy topics. There is obviously a lot of topics people need covered now. And we're now experimenting out in a number of other places, right? And some of those are actually content driven, which is a little more familiar, a webinar format like this. But in some cases, we are trying things that are much more about connecting buyer and seller, not looking to really monetize that as much as keep the dialogue going and add value. Product demonstrations, things of that nature are experimental. And we're seeing good results. And I would probably almost any advice on anything is we're thinking about it from what do these attendees need right now? And let's put it in front of them, right? As opposed to what might we be able to sell today, right? Doesn't mean we won't sell it, but I always believe in more the attendee-led strategy. And so far we're seeing some really, really clever stuff.
And what are you charging for?
The things that are easier to charge for now are sponsored webinars, or a format that has existed. There's some familiarity with it. So those are, can tend to anywhere from $5,000 to $15,000 for an individual sponsorship.
Hervé?
Yeah, I think you got to prove the audience, right? You got to prove the audience.
Hervé?
Yeah, fully agree with what Greg said. In our shows where we have content, we have publication, we have webinars, and that is an ongoing revenue stream that works. One thing, just taking a step back, that I would like to say, and I make a kind of a plea to the industry here, is that we should change the word social distancing to physical distancing, because I think social distancing is not appropriate in our industry. Physical distancing clearly is, and we need to continue to have that. But we're looking at our business as a platform, whether it's a platform as a marketplace or a platform to do the things that our customers are looking to do. Could be brand extension, could be getting leads, could be education, could be connections. And so how can we change the experience such that we, instead of being a pure play or virtually pure play live experience company, how can we offer a platform that is online and offline? And of course, the offline, the physical part will be the high impact events that we have, but can we supplement that on a year-round basis with online touch points? And I think we can, and those are the kinds of things that we're currently looking at, with different ways to add to that platform.
Excellent. Doug?
I mean, I'd probably add two things. And I think where we're seeing revenue opportunities is around existing businesses. So we have quite a large medical business that has online education, and that's existed for 4 or 5 years. So we're seeing in these times an increased take-up by non-frontline doctors who have got the time at the moment who want to do more education. But I mean, I would say that this is not really a sort of a silver bullet to sort of get new revenue streams. So where we're doing it in our other businesses is really to add value to the existing customers rather than to raise revenue.
Cassandra, anything to add?
Yeah, no, I think the group has largely covered it. Same sorts of things.
Just bouncing back to the insurance question before, because a good question came up. It was the question asked if vendor expenses were included in the insurance claim, or does force majeure apply? Here's how it was explained to me by the insurance companies on how the coverage works for the event cancellation. If you have an event that had $1 million in revenue and $700,000 in expense and netted $300,000, and that was the budget, and that's what you insured. You then paid back all the $1 million came from your exhibitors in that show, and you paid all of that back. The insurance company is going to look at the expenses that were incurred. So you already spent all the marketing dollars because the show was 2 weeks out when you cancel it. So you already spent all the marketing dollars, you had your staff costs, you had whatever physical expenses were there, but you didn't actually get on site, so you didn't build the show. You didn't use the AV, you didn't use the venue, many of those other expenses. So where force majeure, whether it's a hotel contract that you had a force majeure clause you could get out of, or a convention center, or you had AV that you didn't use, you had the building you didn't use, they are going to expect you to implement those force majeure clauses and negate those expenses. In the case of venues, maybe you'll get deposits back, as we will with some things. And they will look at the expenses that were already physically spent, i.e. you printed signs, you did marketing efforts, you sent out mailings, you had staff costs, whatever it may be. So those costs that were actually expended will be added up. They will look at the net, the $300,000 net to make you whole. And so if you had $200,000 worth of actual expenses prior to the cancellation that can't be recovered, plus $300,000 in net profit that you would have achieved from that show, the insurance company should write you a check for $500,000. That makes you whole. That covers the expenses you had, that covers the profit you had. And then, of course, the question comes, well, what about my housing company, or what about my registration company, or the building that went through? And what it was put to me was that the insurance company said, well, those entities should have their own cancellation insurance, business interruption insurance, et cetera, to cover their own losses. So, for example, with our registration company, maybe we already paid them for all the work they did leading up to the show, but then we don't pay them for the equipment and things that never got used to run registration on site. That's a simplistic view of how it's been explained to me. So hopefully that's helpful. I would, of course, recommend you talk to your insurance companies for specific. Back to the questions. Hervé, what about other non-revenue streams? What are you developing to generate other non-show revenue, non-show revenue streams? What are you looking at right now?
I would say that the vast majority of our focus is really looking at the online platform. The only exception to that is building out an activation unit that we have that really look at non-endemic brand sponsorship across our business that can be applied to live as well as to online. That would be the only additional part revenue stream that we're looking at that we hadn't really focused on as much before.
Okay, Douglas?
Yeah, I'd say a couple of things. We just sort of touching on virtual and other online. We're also experimenting with doing a hybrid. where we're actually looking at introducing some virtual components to the physical event. And we're really in the planning stage of doing that and launching that for the fall. And the reason we're doing that is, unfortunately, we're expecting some of our key buyers actually won't physically come. So what we're looking at is actually, to the extent that they don't come, we can offer them a virtual meeting with some of the key vendors, so that actually we keep that interaction. So that's one thing that we're looking at. And then, I mean, I think one of the issues around sort of online products is there's a lot of them out there. They're quite confusing. A lot of them are very clunky. So it's quite difficult to sort of work one's way through it. But I mean, I would just sort of maybe point people to a couple of I think, pretty good examples out there just on sort of listings and making money from exhibitor listings. And I think Easy Fairs do a good job there with their Easy Go product. So people might want to have a look at that. And actually, Messe Munich have actually got some sort of interesting digital services that they offer up. So I mean, that's where we are. We're experimenting, we're looking and seeing what other people are doing.
Greg, anything on that?
Is there. So yeah, I certainly online is the main, is our main thrust. And I think, just piggybacking off of what Doug said, to me, I think the kind of more exciting piece of this is the notion of virtual meeting, right? I think we've all experienced that over decades. We have people who can't make our shows, right? They register and they can't make it. And that value is all lost for everybody involved. And now I think we're thinking of it a little bit differently. And a slight silver lining may be, if we figure out how to engage those people in this moment of emergency, that is going to be valuable when we get back to normalcy, because there will always who couldn't make it, and that value is all lost. So to me, that's an opportunity. It's given us an opportunity to focus on that.
Cassandra, following on that, what about change in behavior that comes from this? If we're putting in online virtual events to replace some of our physical events, what do we do next year? Do we just pretend this was all a bad dream and we forget about these things that we've started and tried? Do we think that some people will never come to an live event again? What are you expecting to be a change in behavior, and how are you going to change your own events because of that?
Yeah, I think that there is unquestionably going to be some shift to a new normal. There will absolutely be people, David, just like yourself, who said yesterday, you cannot wait to get on a plane again. And that is going to be the reality for some people. There are going to be people who, like my father, after 9/11, his first flying experience after 9/11, he did it once and he's like, I'm never doing it again. Experience has changed way too much. I hate it. I'm not doing it again. And they just don't feel safe or secure or feel like it's worth whatever our new normal is going to be. So we're going to have a range of that. The new normal will settle in over time, and take, certainly, as Greg was just saying, taking some of the lessons that we are able to learn and the best practices we are able to develop during this very tough time, and applying them in new and innovative ways going forward, disrupting ourselves in a way, rather than being disrupted from the outside. We're being forced to innovate in very interesting ways. And I think that there's actually a whole lot of opportunity to make these things much better for a much larger audience going forward. We just have to figure it out along the way.
David, if I could just add to that, the reality, if we look at other areas around us, like sports, people watch television, watch games on television. They follow players on social media. They follow it on the internet in terms of stats and so forth. And then they go to a live event. And I think one actually increases the other. So I think that the more that we create a year-round, smart, intelligent, online and offline platform, which this is really pushing us to do, I think it'll actually enhance the live event experience. actually it'll put more pressure on the live event experience. I think that we can create really neat and sexy online experiences, and I think all of us will. And I think what will then happen is that it'll put even more pressure on the live event one. So we'll need to make them just as interesting and experiential as the online. And that's where, for instance, our focus on activation comes in. How can the brands, how can our customers help us, in fact, create these types of experiences?
Great point. Doug, any input on that?
Yeah, I mean, just a sort of different thought of the new normal. I mean, and it's something that we're thinking through, is that we're seeing a lot of events being crushed into a very short period of time. And that's going to have ramifications in terms of the calendar for, say, the next 24 months. What's going to be the cycle of a show that was in the spring that's moved to the fall? What's going to happen in 21? What's going to happen in 22? And I think that the assumption has always been that a customer will want a show every year, every 2 years, every 6 months. But I think what we're experiencing is the exhibitors are desperate to get back out there to sell products. So I definitely think when things resume, they're going to want more shows, and I think they're going to be less picky about having a show 2 or 3 months later. The issue is going to be less about the exhibitors, but it's actually going to be about getting the visitors to come. I think that's going to be the major challenge in terms of building confidence to get people to come to live events. That's going to be our challenge, and I think, unfortunately, will take a lot longer than we probably think.
Yeah, no, I think it's good. Anything else on that? Let's talk a little bit about the bailouts that have been announced. I mean, Doug, I know the UK came forward with a program probably quite early on, a few weeks ago, and we've got the latest stimulus program in the US that was signed on Friday. What experiences, Doug, what have you seen so far in what you think they will do to help your business?
Well, I mean, at the moment, I think what's interesting is that I think a lot of the politicians, and this tends to be the case, are fighting the last war. So a lot of the stimulus is actually what was put in place in 2008, 2009, and this is a totally different war. This is more akin to a natural disaster rather than the banking system. So I think what's been good in the UK is that the government has moved very quickly to get money to the individual workers. So in terms of furloughing, they are actually guaranteeing 80% of the individual's wage where they're actually not working up to a certain amount, and they're doing that for 3 months. I mean, I think the reality is that will have to be extended. And the big challenge is also we have a lot of people who are self-employed. And again, they're working their way through that. They're doing a similar package, but it's not working as efficiently because there's so many different types of self-employed people. So I mean, the government is, in my view, doing a very good job to get money out there quickly, but it's a real challenge.
Cassandra, from the US side, have you looked at it, what it means to your business?
Yeah, we've obviously looked at the CARES Act pretty carefully and seeing what benefits in there that we may be able to apply, and figuring out how that applies with, what our own financial position and how, where we are coming from. We're in a unique situation that as a cannabis related business, some things have always not been available to us. And that's part of what we are working through, which is a situation very, very unique to us.
But you are an essential business.
That's what we hear in many cases.
Good. What are you doing with staff? I mean, Greg, you've got we've got staff. We've all got shows that aren't happening right now. We're certainly not selling much in many of them. Registrations have dried up. sales, booth sales have dried up. What are you doing with those staff to change their focus to what are you using them for right now?
Yeah, that's a good question, and a part of it is really trying to move resource to where there's opportunity, right? So one of the advantages I guess you have if you have a fairly diverse portfolio is we have a lot of already scheduled fall into winter events, and then we have other events that have now been rescheduled into late fall or even early fall. So in some cases, we have actually looked at, let's reassign people to where they may make a difference, right? We have some fabulous events that are scheduled to take place in December and January, you know, that are much less affected, that are actually having pretty normal kind of sales weeks and things like that. So let's focus on those, right? As opposed to something that's still being figured out, and all of that. I think clearly being efficient is important. You know, we're looking anywhere we can to be lean, and you know that's sort of, I think, a given, right? But getting people to feel that sense of satisfaction that I can still do this, I can still have good conversations, really makes a difference, I think, in people's day as well.
Doug?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I mean, at the moment, we've got, 46 events that we're, rescheduling into the fall. So, the operational teams are being very busy just with the mechanics of doing that. The marketing teams are obviously redoing all their schedules and how they're going to do, and when are they actually going to restart the marketing. And on the salespeople, obviously, it's difficult to sell. So we're mainly using them in terms of customer relations, collections, and just focusing on what is going to be an incredibly busy period, because having 140% of your normal capacity concentrated in a period, it's going to mean that everyone's going to be absolutely flat out. So the employees are going to be absolutely key. So they're busy at the moment. There'll probably be a lull, and then hopefully it'll be a mad panic.
Well, I can add from our perspective, we've got a couple of shows, a couple of events we've had to cancel. So our sales team are obviously very busy with the customer service, as Doug talked about, communicating the challenges, the changes with them, also handling requests for refunds, and trying wherever possible to convince those exhibitors and sponsors to roll their payments and their commitments over to the next event, which in most cases next year. We've also focused on the sales and marketing people and said, okay, we're always a little overloaded, so our data is never as good as it could be. Our lists are never as clean as they should be. Our updated information is never as up to date as it should be. So we've got no excuse now. We've got X number of weeks. We've got to come out of this with the cleanest damn data there is, as we get into ramping back up again. Cassandra, anything on your side?
Yeah, it's similar that, as we've been building what has been a small business into a very big show, we have always felt like we're drinking from the fire hose. And in some ways, this enforced pause is very welcome and lets us get ahead of that boulder that we felt like we have always been 1 or 2 steps ahead of. And so we are focusing on that and making the most of that opportunity and looking at that as a silver lining.
Okay, here's where everybody wants you to bring your crystal balls out and make a forecast. The big question is, when do you think shows and conferences will start again? And do you think there'll be a difference between small domestic local events versus large international events in terms of when they start, how they start, and so forth? Doug, I'll start with you.
Thanks, David. Well, I think the interesting thing, we're in the last day of March. March has been a terrible month. I think, unfortunately, April is going to be worse. But as I mentioned earlier, this started for us with our Chinese business on January the 12th. And what gives me hope is actually what's going on in China. We've got 250 people there. We've got 8 offices. Every single office is now reopened, apart from our office in Wuhan, and that will open again on April 8th. They're holding meetings. The restaurants are busy. The subways are busy. And interestingly, the first show in China generally is scheduled for the end of April in Shenyang. So that is really positive. And we're looking at holding our first event in China in June. So that is positive. And what we're seeing is the regulations to allow shows to start again in May has already started. The contractors are gearing up. All the reg companies, all the marketing, all that machinery and all the planning is happening now. So that is encouraging. And we're assuming that if that follows the pattern through to the West, that by the end of the summer, we can run shows again in the US. So we're looking at September for a resumption. So that's our base assumption at the moment.
So your guess is no events really before September?
Correct.
Here in the West.
Yeah, absolutely. That's our assumption.
Okay. Who else wants to take a stab at this? Cassandra?
I think it is going to be here in the United States, at least. I think that there are large swaths of the population who, probably including myself, who really don't feel like we have an idea of how bad this is going to be before it starts getting better. That realization is really just starting to hit. So my guess is that we're probably a good 4, maybe 6 weeks out from being able to get past this really murky crystal ball area, and be able to see, all right, it's starting to clear up and here's what it might look like going forward. Yeah, I would want to push pause on making a prognostication down that road for probably about 4 weeks.
You're waiting for the peak,
right?
I think is what the
yeah. Now, what Doug was just saying too, though, about China, that has absolutely been on my mind, and so I'm very interested and eager to see what happens as China executes its exit strategy from isolation. And how that actually works, whether they have a rebound, how these shows actually come to pass, how they implement safety and security in this new normal. I'm very glad that we have that as a case study to look for.
The only thing I would add.
Sorry, Hervé, go ahead, Hervé.
I agree fully with what Doug and Cassandra said, and we're also tracking the activities in China as a potential indicator for what's going to happen in the U.S. and in Europe. But I do think that the new normal, at least for the short term, will be very little, if any, international attendance. China, for instance, still has a ban on international visitation. And so it will largely be, even in China, when they reopen, let's say in Shanghai and Beijing in mid-May, will largely be large domestic shows. So I agree on the timing. I think, we have some optimism around end of summer, beginning of fall, but clearly we do need to get through the next month to really see where it peaks and how that will translate into possibilities for the U.S. business.
Well, I think the challenge for us is that, as has been mentioned, we don't know when it's going to peak. We can use China as a benchmark to some degree, and hope that is something we can follow and assume will follow into Europe and then into the Americas. But until we see when there's some expectation of relaxation of these bans, we're not going to be able to sell anything. So even if the bans are all taken off in May, if you've got an event in June or July, nobody's buying it, nobody's registering it for it, at best until June, if you can. So that's where I think it's flowing to Doug's point, that it's probably the fall before we really see events being able to get back to, close to full speed. Yeah. Greg?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's going to be sort of an interesting indicator as well is professional sports, right? Yeah. Because I think they are under even more pressure, and that you're talking about your numbers of people in shorter windows, right, with closer proximity. So, and I think I certainly know I miss it. almost as much as trade shows. And I think watching what they do is going to be really interesting, right? And I think just from a consumer behavior perspective, but also from another huge industry that has a vested interest in social gathering. So curious to see what happens there.
I think it's a very good point, and only not even a month ago we were all, I think, using the same example for exhibitors that were questioning what was when the events were going to be canceled. With, well, they're still putting 60,000 people in a stadium, they're still putting 50,000 people at Disneyland every day, so that's the benchmark we were using. I think Greg's point is a really good one. Once we see those starting to happen again, that will give us some talking points for our own customers. Yeah. Going on to Doug, you touched on it briefly earlier on, but with the the challenges that our contractors and service providers have been going through, all our partners on the whole supply chain, from the venues to the general contractors to the other contractors, we're seeing a lot of furloughs, we're seeing a lot of layoffs. We are now going to roll into this period where we're probably going to have the densest period of shows maybe the industry's ever seen in some regions. What's your position and concern on being able to actually manage those shows with the contractors and service partners of ours having to ramp back up?
Well, I think the challenges are going to be around the labour. Obviously, they've let a lot of that labour, go into furlough. Is that labour going to be there when they need it? Is it going to be there in the volume that they'll need it? Because I think, as I said earlier, it looks like about 140% capacity is going to happen in the fall period. And then that just puts pressure on the equipment side. There's just not going to be enough equipment to go around. So I think, as Herbie went through, I think a lot of relationships are going to be key in that prioritization, not only in terms of the importance of the show, but in terms of actually the relationship with the contractors. So I think it's just really important to keep a dialogue going with the contractors in terms of your scheduling or your rescheduling of shows to make sure that you're not the one that's left without the seat when the music stops.
Yes, Hervé?
I agree. The only thing I'll add to Doug's points are, in this new normal, we also have to start thinking about who is going to actually perform some of the things that we absolutely need in order to be successful. So whether it's a venue or ourselves as show organizers or the exhibitors to some degree or other vendors, things like the hygiene measures. Mm-hmm. So the sanitizing stations, the enhanced cleaning, the food hygiene, all these things on the medical measures as well, the thermo screening that has been recommended. So I think there's going to be immense pressure in a condensed period of time with a new normal of extraordinary intensity of the kinds of things that we're going to need to do in order to be successful. Now, these may get scaled down over time. I don't know if all of them will stay forever, but at least at the beginning, I really fully expect that we'll need to do significantly more than we've ever done.
Yeah, and I think that that flows on to sort of question, how do we think what changes do we think that will impact the industry long term, not just this fall with dealing with this, but long term, what impact do we think that COVID-19 will leave behind it? How will that affect the venue safety and security and mass gatherings for the long term, a year from now, 2 years from now? Where do you see that position happening? Cassandra, you want to?
Yeah, as Hervé was just speaking, what occurred to me is that for anybody who has been on a cruise, they have hand washing stations everywhere. They have hand sanitizer everywhere. And they are constantly reminding, every single staff member is constantly reminding every single passenger to please wash your hands, avoid touching the public surfaces if you can, things like that. And maybe it looks something like that, where venues install those sorts of things permanently, much like they went back and had to retrofit for ADA compliance. Just one example that just popped to mind.
Yeah.
But I think that we will have some things like that that come up that become, as we've been talking about, a new normal for the way that big shows and even medium sized and even conferences, small conferences, do business when we all get together in the same space.
Greg?
Yeah, I would say the new normal, it's like post-terrorism security, right? You know, there was a time when having dogs at a show was not anything we ever discussed, and now it's fairly commonplace, and the question is how many and where, right? You know, bag checking, metal detection, those are things that are now just a part of our execution plan. And all the way back to what Doug said, I think it will be really, really hectic, and I can't be more excited to deal with it. Right? Like, to me, this is going to turn into, you know, 'cause I think we'll all be excited to be fully back in business. Right?
Sure.
Right. And while that will mean lots of hours etched and everything else, I think there's, you know, I'm sure everybody's up for that challenge.
Well, and coming back on that, and Doug, let me start this with you. Two parts. What do you think the ongoing travel restrictions are going to be 2 months, 4 months, 8 months, 12 months from now? What do you think that'll impact our attendance at our events, especially larger international events? And what do you think the impact's going to be on next year's shows? Because we're all trying to just deal with today and today's shows and this year's shows and postponing and rescheduling. But what impact's that going to have on next year's shows, or maybe even the year after?
Yeah, I mean, I think it sort of flows really into sort of one thing that we're spending a lot of time thinking about is actually, you know, getting visitors to come to the shows again and getting the confidence. You know, for every month that people are not out there traveling, it's 25 billion in terms of economic impact, and obviously shows are a large part of that. But I think, you know, getting internationals is going to be a lot more difficult because obviously, you know, 2 to 12 months is going to be quite different in terms of restrictions and the relaxing of restrictions. But I think actually the whole visitor experience, I think will change. I mean, I suspect one of the changes will no longer be acceptable to have large queues at registrations to get into shows. There's going to be, you know, people management in terms of number of people in the hall at one time. And, you know, we're going to have to think about how we manage that and manage the customer experience a lot more than we ever did before, because, you know, it used to be good to have lots of people in the hall and look busy. And I think people will be more focused around their own personal safety and security rather than, you know, having lots of people close to them.
So guaranteeing personal space to attendees?
Yeah. We'll be selling them 6 feet barriers around them going down the aisles.
There's an alternative revenue stream.
There you go. Hervé, what do you any additional thoughts on that?
No, I completely agree with Doug.
Anybody else jump in on that one? Slightly different topic. What's happened to M&A right now? And many of you up there, Doug and Greg and Hervé, you've all been very active acquirers recently. You know, Doug, I'll kick it off with you again. What's happened to your M&A strategy right now?
Well, I think everybody is in the same place. I mean, I think other than sort of Ted at Diversified, I think has actually done the only deal during the last sort of month. M&A really has ground to a halt, and I think that's across not just our industry. I think it's across all industries. Everybody is focused on their own business and actually the operations of going forward in the short term. But I think what will happen out of this when things do recover is I think there'll be a lot of changes in the industry. I think there'll be more consolidation. I think we'll see a lot of the things certainly that Galen has spoken about at many SISOs in terms of, you know, partnerships with associations. I think we'll probably see an acceleration there. And I think we'll see, you know, some interesting innovation as a result of the new normal. You know, maybe we'll see traditional show organizers and online companies come together. I think we'll see some different things. We always do through every crisis.
Yeah, Hervé.
Agree entirely with Doug. I mean, this is obviously a difficult time from a valuation perspective, but what we're trying to do is to resist the temptation to just follow up on anything that's there, but rather we do have a very clear M&A strategy. We have targets, and I think staying on top of them, the strong shows will survive, will continue to do well. But the timing, of course, is going to be difficult from a valuation perspective. We did a deal like a month ago, and it was a very small deal, and I think that it worked at that time, and we'll continue to look for deals that make sense at this time, but it will not be easy.
Greg,
I agree with Doug's comment on partnerships as well. I think that
yeah, I was going to expand on that with Greg. I know on the association side, we saw, I think, after the last financial crash a decade ago, we saw a number of associations take a look at their business model and realize that they had an awful lot of eggs in their show basket, so to speak, and that's relevant mostly in the U.S., where associations are still the running the majority of events compared to the rest of the world. But you work with a lot of associations. I've worked with a number of them. What do you see this having the same sort of impact as the last financial crisis, and a lot of associations revisiting their strategies?
Yeah, probably more, actually, because I think this has been sort of more sudden and more stark, and just kind of highlights the risk factor of having a single event. And I think that's definitely going to open a lot of conversations. I don't have anything new. I think similar to the other guys, it's not the priority right now. The only thing that I would say that I do have fairly frequent conversations on are what I would consider more partnerships. And I feel like I'm always open to those, right? I feel like there's a lot of tough stuff going on right now. And if you're stuck in bad timing, I think it's creating, I'm going to say, opportunity for partnership. And I don't mean that I mean that in a genuine olive branch kind of way, that if someone is saying, could I co-locate with you because you're in a seemingly safe date and it might be good for everybody, I'm talking to folks about that. That's acquisition. That's not, I don't know what that is, but it's frankly, to me, the right thing to do. And I think there are folks that are just really stuck in some bad timing, and the fact that there's been a lot more sort of those kinds of conversations, I think, is a really, really good thing. And, down the road, does that lead to something? Who knows? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But right now, it just feels like it's.
Well, and it sounds, I mean, that's very similar to what I just read today about a lot of the major airlines in the US are discussing ways to continue to service smaller routes and smaller markets by actually sharing a plane. Instead of having 3 airlines fly the same route every day with 10% seat occupancy, actually having all 3 of them share one plane and reduce costs and still service that market. That seems, Greg, to be similar to the line that you were talking about. That's if there's competing events that can assist each other, or an association that has an event of its own and for profit, maybe there's a way to cooperate and make sure that the market's getting served. Most importantly, so that the market continues to grow for everybody in the future years. Does that sound like a plan for everybody?
Absolutely.
We're already over time, but there was a couple of questions out there that I wanted to throw back at you that would request for a little more detail. I don't know if anybody wants to jump on this, but there was some question about specifics in terms of incentives that you're offering exhibitors to either support the next show or to support a rescheduled show, or any specific ideas on what you're offering. We talked about the GSMA. GSMA's program just came out, I think, yesterday, where they are giving all small exhibitors 100% refunds back. But the larger, as the exhibitors grow in size, they're offering them a bigger incentive to roll out, so that if they are willing to roll their payments over to next year's show, they actually get extra value, up to 125%, I think it is, of the value of that spread over the next 2 shows. What other ideas are any of you, have you been trying or offering to your exhibitors right now to either support a rescheduled event or to roll over to next year's event? Doug, anybody you want to start?
I mean, nothing extraordinary in terms of sort of the rollover. I mean, I think more of a challenge is actually for the fall shows or for the shows taking place next year. Encouraging people to pay because obviously everybody's having a hard time. And one example that we're using quite successfully is we have a restaurant show down in Mexico, and actually for any payments that we get in, we're giving a percentage of that to the restaurant workers who are obviously, not working at the moment. So we're encouraging people to pay because it helps the community.
That's a great idea. Hervé, anything?
No, nothing really specific. I think for the large part, it's definitely a client by client situation issue. But in large part, I haven't seen it to be a very big issue. I think when we're postponing shows in the current year, clear rollover into the next year, that only applies for cancellations, but in our case, has been very, very few of those. So it hasn't been as big of an issue for us.
Super. Cassandra, anything you've tried?
Not that hasn't been discussed yet. It's a client by client relationship.
Okay. I think we need to wrap it up. Anybody got any closing thoughts or comments they want to throw out?
It's been fun watching the chat. It's kind of like a virtual version of the stand up and state your name, rank, and serial number, so to speak. So I miss all of you all as well.
Yep.
I would just say.
Oh yes, sorry. Go ahead, please.
No, I was just going to say that uncertainty creates significant amount of anxiety, and I think we're all feeling it as an industry. But our people, our employees, our colleagues, our partners, our vendors are also really feeling it. So to the degree that we can continue to hold hands through this very difficult time and focus on people, on ourselves, I think staying healthy. I mean, we do have a bit more time. We're home. So focusing on health, on working out, on doing the things that really also matter from a personal perspective, I would say is really, really critical. We talked a lot about the business side, which is critical, but I would also like to emphasize the personal side of things.
I think it's a great point. It's an incredibly stressful time for everybody, whether they are just dealing with their own business issues or as employees, they're dealing with uncertainty going forward. And it's, we are an industry of people, and it's essential that we take care of them most of all as best we can. Carolyn's going to put up a slide that for everybody, that's just a reminder that SISO has started an online discussion forum tool that's open to all SISO contacts at all SISO members. So please take advantage of it as best you can. If you have any questions or challenges getting into it, you should have received every contact we have note of that's with a SISO member should have received a couple of emails over the last few weeks instructing them how to connect to these online communities. If you have any challenges, just email out to info@siso.org and I'll be able to help you with solving any of those challenges. I want to thank SISO's officers and the team here that's for this first town hall of ours. Thank you very much for the time and prep work on doing this. And to Carolyn and the team from Dahlia behind the scenes helping us to get this going. We appreciate it. We will get this taped and up online in the next 24, 48 hours for anybody you want to share it with anybody else. And we are also, through SISO's special interest groups, we are facilitating smaller discussion forums, video conference type roundtable forums, and the special interest group steering committees will be out talking with the membership in general about how those can be facilitated and put together. And we'll continue doing these town halls, I'm sure, on a monthly basis at least. So good luck with all of your business efforts these stressful weeks, and stay healthy. And we look forward to talking with you all soon. Thank you.